Good afternoon, everyone. This is such a wonderful audience, and it's really quite a thrill and an honor to be here to welcome Anderson Cooper as our 2023 Spring Chubb Fellow. My name is Mary Lui. I am the head of college for Timothy Dwight College, and it is truly Thank you, TD. It's always... I think you packed the house. We might have tipped the scales a little bit. So before we begin today's conversation with Anderson Cooper, I'm just going to ask that all of you turn off your cell phones and refrain from taking any photographs while the program is going. I would also like to start our program with a land acknowledgement. Today's Chubb Fellowship event sits on traditional indigenous territories. This includes lands of the Mohegan, the Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Shakaticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin-speaking peoples. We honor and pay respect to their peoples of past and present. As I said, my name is Mary Lui. I'm the head of college of Timothy Dwight College. I'm a professor in the Department of History and the program in American Studies. I also have the great honor of being the custodian of the Chubb Fellowship. And I want to give you a little bit of information and background about the Chubb before we begin. Established in 1941, the Chubb Fellowship came out of a large donation for quote-unquote education purposes made in 1936 by Hendon Chubb, a graduate of the Yale class of 1895. Since its establishment, the Chubb Fund has adhered to the goals of providing encouragement and aid to students interested in government and American public affairs. The fellowship initially aimed to foster among Yale undergraduates an interest in public service in local and state affairs, grew over the years to include numerous distinguished visitors in national and international affairs, as well as leaders in the world of the arts and humanities. Since the 1940s, the Chubb Fellowship Lecture Series has inspired generations of Yale students to undertake public service and pursue leadership roles in the hopes of creating a better world today and for posterity. The fellowship has hosted 4 U.S. presidents: George H.W. Bush, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Harry Truman. In recent years, we have welcomed a wide range of national and international leaders, including our congressional representative, the Honorable Rosa DeLauro, violin virtuoso Hilary Hahn, highly decorated Olympic figure skater Michelle Kwan, visual artist Faith Ringgold, environmental activist Bill McKibben, Somali physician and humanitarian Dr. Hawa Abdi, and so many more. So with this quick description of the history and aims of the Chubb Fellowship, I'm deeply honored to have Anderson Cooper join the impressive list of Chubb Fellows who have visited Timothy Dwight College and Yale's campus. So welcome, Anderson. And now I want to welcome to the stage James Jimmy Hatch to introduce Anderson Cooper fully and properly. Come on up.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, everybody, for who clapped. I don't know why you would do that, but whatever. I know everybody wants to hear Anderson, so I'm going to make this quick, but I think it's important. I met Anderson when he interviewed me in, I think it was 2015. And he made quite an impact on me. I'd seen him on television, and I'd seen him do some things that, to me, were rather impressive, and I'll get to those in a second. First thing I want to do is read, so you get to know him. See, this is not unlike Anderson. He fixed my tie once in an interview. Get it together, Mary. So before his late mother passed, and she wrote this book, and I found this part of it really beautiful, knowing Anderson a little bit. So I'm just going to read her description. To quote Elizabeth Browning, "I love you in ways that are infinite and as in eternity have no beginning or end. But are we alike? And again, this is his mother speaking. Sometimes I think hardly at all. You are the living image of your father, not only in appearance, but in valuing the same standards he held in high regard. Standards that are sometimes hard to live by. Other times, yes, we are indeed completely alike. We share sensitivity, tempered by poise and the reserve to reveal only what we wish to communicate. We have the gift of editing, presenting ourselves in different ways to different people. We are not gossips. We are worthy to be trusted with secrets of family and friends. We have fun going to the movies together, sharing a bag of popcorn. We do not burden each other with trivial troubles or pull each other down with unsupportive comments. We advise each other on pressing matters from time to time, and you always give me a short, sensible, well-thought-out solution to any problem. I try to respond in the same manner. We both spend a lot of time organizing our lives, secretly working out various options and scenarios in our heads. Luckily, yours are far more practical and more likely to become reality than mine, which continue to be influenced by the enchanted fairy tales I read as a child. In spite of this, I treasure those fairy tales, for they are, in large part, what spur my creativity. We share a restless spirit. In fact, we are never at rest, and rarely, if ever, will anything satisfy Andy and his mom. Soon, something beckons. It's there, around the corner, just out of sight. All we need do is follow. All my life I have craved and longed for love, and I have not been deprived. My cup hath runneth over. But it was never enough. It never got anywhere near what the trouble really was. No mother, no father, as my secret sister Susan Sontag knew too well. Here, Andy, thankfully, we are not alike. Even though you lost your father when you were 10, you knew that there wasn't a moment from birth when you didn't have and know his support, how fully, completely he loved you and Carter. Although only those years were given, they were enough for him to pass on to you the values that have made you the person that you are. My son, treasured each moment of my life. I don't think you can get much better than that. Now, as for me personally, I remember watching, I was in the SEAL teams, and in the SEAL teams, people like Anderson, journalists, are essentially the same as any other enemy we have. So I was rather harsh on journalists, but I remember watching, it was in the early 90s, and I've discussed this with one of Anderson's camera guys, Neil. They were in Haiti, and there were some troubles there. Often there are troubles in Haiti. But Anderson was standing at an intersection, and he was on camera. I was watching him, and I think I was actually overseas somewhere when I was watching it. And he's talking, and all of a sudden you can see on the buildings behind him rocks and other projectiles hitting them, and it was getting ugly quick. And Anderson immediately turned and grabbed this kid, threw him under his arm, and started running out of the intersection. And I thought to myself, man, you know, that's something you're either born with or not. You can't train somebody to do that, to be that thoughtful in the middle of an emergency situation like that, to grab someone who can't be protected and get him out of there. So that was he became less of an enemy at that point to me. And then I was in New York after Anderson and I had gotten to be a little bit closer. I was in New York for another function, and I went to the CNN studios, and it happened to be the same time that the Pulse nightclub shooting had gone down. So Anderson was in Orlando. And I was in the production room. It's really cool to see how the sausage is made, so to speak, how busy people are. And Anderson was down there, and he was reporting on the shooting, and then they went to a commercial. And during the commercial, Anderson had a long piece of paper, and he was reading off names. And there was one of the producers in the booth was helping him so that he could say the names properly. And some of them were tough, and it was so emotional, and Anderson was emotional, but his drive to be respectful and to make sure that everybody who'd lost their life was acknowledged and done so in a respectful way. And the way he did that in that short chunk of time and earnestly showed me who he was. And then when he read their names, he's human. He's not a robot. And I was taken by that. The thing that is the most important about Anderson to me, and it's something that is really important that I've learned here at Yale in my short time, and through my time in the military, we are in a time when it's easy to dehumanize one another. And Anderson interviews a lot of different people and is in a lot of different situations, and I've never, ever seen him, even though he might disagree, I've never seen him dehumanize another person. I think that's a super important thing right now, and I think it's an example for all of us. And with that, I'll shut up and let him get after it.
I realize in my incitement to just get going with the conversation with you, I didn't properly introduce you, Jimmy, and I really apologize. So I'm going to say, no, I'm going to do it because, Anderson won't forgive me if I don't. So who you just heard from is a wonderful member of our Timothy Dwight College community. This is Jimmy Hatch, third-year student. He's part of the Eli Whitney program. He's also the founder of Spike's Canine Fund, which advocates for the U.S. working canine population. So he's done incredible work there, and cannot thank you enough for all you do. So, okay, with that, I think we can
Hello.
segue. Hello.
Reading the list of names of people who've done this before, I feel like I've really brought the gradient down. I feel like you guys were desperate or something. But I appreciate being here, though, and thank you all for coming.
No. We were very thoughtful. There were many other people.
You shouldn't start off with U.S. presidents. It's a little intimidating, I gotta say.
Oh, I don't know.
Especially Truman, wow, okay. Did he sit here? Was he?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
That would be the wrong timeline.
Yeah, I know.
But that's okay. So I would say, as we were joking before on our way here, that for me, preparing for this conversation with you was a little bit like cramming for an exam, where I was madly reading and rereading works of yours.
Right.
And I really
ChatGPT will take care of that. Don't worry.
The TD community knows a little bit too much about me and ChatGPT, but that's another story. But in all seriousness, looking at all the things you have accomplished, and here you are with your CNN badge right out here, along with the publication starting with Dispatches from the Edge, and that was back in 2005, I want to say, 2006.
Probably 2006, something.
Yeah,
That was my first book I wrote.
Yeah, and then Vanderbilt, Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty, 2021.
Yes.
There's a lot in between. I don't quite understand how you have the time to do all of that while being on CNN, while being on 60 Minutes, and then doing all the things that you've done. So I'm curious to hear how you see your writing projects that you've done along the way. If you don't mind, I would actually like to start there.
Yeah.
And has there been a pathway, a vision of what you would be?
So I've written I'm writing a fourth book now. My first book, Dispatches from the Edge, was a book I'd been writing in my head for probably 10 years. I wrote it in 2006. I got offered the opportunity to write it during the Hurricane Katrina coverage, and which is when I guess some people started to notice me more a little bit. And so actually a kid I went to high school with who turned out to be a literary agent, actually a kid I went to elementary school with and have known my entire life, who used to be in a heavy metal band. I'd lost touch with him. He called me up. Turns out he's a literary agent now. I'm like, how did that happen? He became my literary agent, and I wrote this book. And I'd been writing this book in my head for a long time. My brother, Carter, died by suicide right before my senior year at Yale. So my senior year was kind of a blur here. I took a year off after college. And I became very interested in and also my dad died when I was 10, as my mom referenced in Jimmy's reading. So I was always very interested in survival and why two people growing up in a house, why does one person survive and the other person doesn't? The same kind of, we were the same kind of people, what happened? And that always expanded to societies. I was interested in societies that had fallen apart, whether it's through war or political situations or whatever it may be. And so as a child, I used to read a lot about, I was fascinated by Zaire, which was at that time run by President Mobutu. So I would read a lot about that. I was fascinated with British colonial wars. I was like, what the hell was that all about? These British people marching along, attacking the Zulus. And so I was fascinated in places on the planet that I wanted to go to. And I came up with this idea after college to, ultimately I ended up having a friend make a fake press pass. I borrowed a camera and I just started going to wars. And, but I was very much driven by this idea of loss and survival. And so even if I didn't really plan on becoming a reporter, I wanted to go places where the language of loss was spoken. and where people don't talk about grief and loss here very much. And I certainly didn't. I found it very hard to talk about, but I wanted to immerse myself in places where people were suffering and where people did speak about this, and I wanted to understand it. And I found when I got to some places, I found an odd ability to operate in these environments. And I found, in fact, it easier in some ways, not easier, but in some ways, it was comfortable for me to be in some environments more so than like being back home. So that book was really a book about death and loss and survival. And so it was sort of set against the backdrop of 2005, which had Hurricane Katrina and the tsunami and all sorts of stories. There was a lot of stories I covered that year, and they all centered around death and loss. So it's sort of the twin stories of what happened to my brother and also all these places I was along the way. Yeah. And then I wrote a book with my mom. I didn't write for like 10 years later, 10 more years or so, because I had nothing to say. And then my mom turned 91, and she sent me this really kind of interesting, odd, cool email, as she often did. And it was all about how she still felt 17, and something her grandmother had said to her when she was 17. Anyway, I decided, we should have a conversation for a year, because when you have a parent, often you just know them as your parent. You don't really know them as a person or as a friend. And so I knew my mom extraordinarily well, but there were still all these things I kind of didn't understand about her. And there's a lot I don't know about my dad. And I thought, my mom's 91. I don't want her to die and there be anything left unsaid between us. And I don't want there to be any questions. So we had a conscious conversation for a year. I sound like Gwyneth Paltrow, like conscious uncoupling. But we had a conscious conversation for a year, mostly over email, because I was traveling and stuff. But where she would ask me questions, I would ask her questions, and we'd just go back and forth. And it was this amazing conversation that I didn't intend to write as a book. But about halfway through, I was like, you know what? Actually, I think we could kind of make this into a book. And so that was. And then the Vanderbilt was this book I wrote 2 years ago. This is the first time I had a co-writer, a historian, Catherine Howe, who did most of the research. And I didn't really know anything about the Vanderbilt family. I mean, my mom was Gloria Vanderbilt, but she was always thought of herself as like a changeling. She thought she was sort of an imposter in that family and wasn't really part of that family based on some crazy stuff that happened to her as a kid. And so I grew up not really knowing anything about them, and I consciously didn't really want to know anything about them. When I got to Yale, everyone was like, oh, are you staying in the Vanderbilt room? And I was like, A, that's not really a thing, and B, I wouldn't even if I could, because I really want nothing to do with them. But then once I had kids, I suddenly realized, well, what am I going to tell my kids about this kind of weird thing that happened in the past that I'm related to, apparently? And so I started doing research and decided to write that book.
It's funny, until you said, I had nothing to say for 10 years. It almost, I think, again, when you read everything all at the same time, it feels like there hasn't been that gap. Mm-hmm. Because in the first book, the Dispatches book,
I'm basically regurgitating the same stuff. Yeah. I'm just waiting for enough people to die off they don't realize, oh, it's the same book again.
No, I don't think so. But I think looking at Dispatches, what was really incredible was hearing your voice and talking about the things in your life that had been really with you and but you hadn't really explored, while taking us through the insane year that was 2005, beginning with the 2004 tsunami. Yeah. So you're going back and forth between your coverage, dealing with so much death and destruction, and really feeling that incredible responsibility to every single person you're meeting, right, to tell the story, do more than bear witness. I mean, you describe it so powerfully as people are hoping you're going to make a difference by them talking to you. Yeah. While at the same time you're talking through your own efforts to really talk about the pain and suffering you've personally gone through. Right. So then you go from that to, I think, the book with the conscious conversation with your mother. It seems as though you never stopped having that conversation, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, those are all things I still think about all the time. I mean, I think for anybody who lost a parent in this room early on as a child, anybody, if you lose a parent early on, it changes the trajectory of your life. And I certainly wasn't able to talk about it, the death of my dad. It was so overwhelming. It was so stunning to me. And even now, it's my voice shakes a little bit when I think about it. And so I like talking about it now, but that was something I just didn't speak of. And so going to places where people did speak about loss because they were in the midst of a loss. They had just experienced the loss of a child or loss of their family or, an entire village wiped out or whatever it was. I couldn't help but, I probably could have just gone to therapy and that would have probably made a little more sense early on. But it was an extraordinary, I both as something that I cared very much about bearing witness to what is happening in the world and bearing witness to the suffering of others and the pain that others feel. And also, I couldn't help but feel a commonality in some sense.
Yeah, it seemed as one is working our way through that book, we land in New Orleans in terms of Hurricane Katrina. You're telling us again and again how shocking the whole experience was for you in terms of it being here in the United States. So I'm curious, prior to that, was most of your career out in the world?
Yeah, most everything I did was overseas. I felt like there's a lot of reporters in America, and I'm like the guy with a fake press pass and a camera. Why am I going to try to compete with somebody at the White House reporting? So yeah, my first story, I snuck into Myanmar, Burma. I hooked up with some students fighting the Burmese government, and I shot a story about them. I then ended up enrolling in school in Hanoi in the last 6 months of the U.S. embargo because I wanted to be someplace where there weren't many Americans because I thought that'd be an interesting experience. So there were a very small number of Americans in Hanoi at the time, I think maybe 20 or so. And yeah, so I studied Vietnamese for a while and I shot 5 stories and then I still didn't get a job. But I was airing these things on a thing called Channel 1, which was a show seen in about half the high schools and middle schools in America in the early 90s. If you know, you know, and if you don't, you think it's ridiculous. But it had this huge audience of kids and teachers. Nobody knew about it, but I was a fact checker there for 6 months. Then that's when I came up with the idea of just going to wars, and that's what I did. And so they would air the stuff, but they still didn't hire me. And then I'd left high school early, and I'd ridden in a truck across sub-Saharan Africa for 6 months. So I was still sort of familiar with Eastern Africa, and so I pitched, okay, I'm going to go to 10 countries over the next 3 months, and I'm going to shoot 10 stories, and these are the stories I think I'm going to be able to shoot. And the first one was Somalia in the early days of a famine in August of '92, before the U.S. got involved, before Black Hawk Down. If you've seen that movie, it was about a year before that, or 8 months before that. Yeah, and Somalia was, it had a big impact on the Channel 1 audience. A lot of people started raising money for it and stuff, and then they hired me full-time as their war person, foreign correspondent. So yeah, Bosnia in the Civil War, Sarajevo, briefly in Rwanda during the genocide, South Africa a lot for the run-up to the years before, and the election of Mandela. Soviet Georgia, wherever there was fighting, I would sort of go. Haiti for when the U.S. invaded after Raúl Cedras, and I was very interested in conflict, and I wanted to see it. I wanted to experience and document what people were going through.
Yeah, for you, is there a big difference between documenting something like an environmental disaster, like a hurricane or a tsunami, versus war?
Logistically, there's some differences, and in terms of, obviously safety and security, there are differences. Not that, which, by the way, when I started, nobody cared about my safety or security other than me. So it wasn't like I didn't have a news network behind me. So I was just out there by myself doing really stupid stuff. So I'm not encouraging other people to do that, because there was a kid named Dan Eldon who was doing the exact same thing I was, and he was hacked to death by a mob in Somalia. And others, but no, I think, obviously everything is different. I try not to compare one thing to another because I don't think there should be a sliding scale of sorrow, and I think you need to see everything with fresh eyes. You need to see everything as if it's the first time you're seeing it, because if you're so jaded at a certain point, it's very easy to like start to compare one thing to another, like, oh, it's not as bad as this place was, 10 years ago. And if you start to do that, you're not seeing it as you should see it, and that's a real risk that can happen. I found myself in Rwanda right after the elections with Mandela. I went to Rwanda, and it's a country I'd been in a number of times as a teenager, in happier times. And I was with the RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, and went to some villages where people had been slaughtered. And I took a photograph, and by this point I'd been doing this for about 3 years, and I took a photograph with my own personal camera of 5 people who were laying on the side of the road, who had decomposed on the side of a road. And I was very interested in that moment in how the skin on this person's hand had peeled off like a glove. And I took a photograph of it, and there was another reporter, a photojournalist, who I'd linked up with, who we were sort of traveling because I had access to a vehicle and he hitched a ride with us. He took a photograph of me doing that, and he sent it to me later, and he said, "This is for when you become famous." And he said something else to me, and what he was saying to me was, you're gone too far. And I actually have that picture up on my bulletin board at work, because it was a real, for me, it was a realization that I was no longer seeing those 5 people, I believe they were family, I was no longer seeing them as a daughter and a mother and a father and probably a son. I was interested in how the skin was peeling off somebody's hand, and so I stopped for quite a while doing that sort of work, because I didn't want to forget. Like, I didn't want to see it like that. I wanted to see it and be horrified by it, and not, interested in the sort of the things that happen. So yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. For me, that's a really important thing, to not, you run across reporters sometimes who are very sort of jaded, and they've been around the world and they've been doing it for years, and you're not doing justice to the people you're there to report on if you're not horrified by things, and if you're not stunned by things. And at least for me, I think I can't do that.
Yeah, you talk a lot about trying to keep that line, and making sure that you're doing your due diligence, forcing us to see the things that we might not want to see, but yet at the same time, I think as Jimmy so eloquently said, never dehumanizing. So it's not easy to do, and I really applaud you for doing that. And I'm just curious, how do you manage to feel like you never lose sight of that line?
I don't know. I mean, I hope I don't. I mean, I try to be very conscious of it. I'm very interested in, I'm sort of awkward around human beings. I'm very shy and introverted, but when I'm working, I'm very engaged with somebody, and it's sort of the only time I can really engage and really focus on somebody. And not the only time, not that weird, but but I do think it's yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question. I mean, I think it's important to not lose sight of the fact that these are all human beings involved in things. When we're covering politicians who are saying awful, stupid, ridiculous things, it's interesting. It's easy to not think of somebody as a human being. It's easy to just think of them as, in Rwanda during, in the run-up to the genocide, on the Rwandan radio, they would call Tutsis cockroaches. And the whole idea is to dehumanize people so that you can then take the next step and do things to them. So, even people you don't like, I think it's important to view them as flawed human beings and try to walk in their shoes and see where they're coming from and understand why they're making the arguments they're making, what forces are at play in their world or in their work life. But just on just day-to-day coverage of things, if there's there was an active shooter today in Louisville. I have a policy. I don't show active shooters. I don't name them. History has recorded these people's names, and I don't think anybody in this room could name somebody who died at Columbine. Maybe somebody could, but you could probably name the killers at Columbine much more than you can name any of the people who were killed. And I think that goes for many of the active shooting situations. So, yeah, I have a policy. I don't show their pictures. I report on them. I report on motivations. I report on whatever needs to be reported on. But I try to always focus on naming the people who have been killed, naming those whose lives were lost. And that's it's a small thing in the grand scale of things, but it does sort of. It is a guidepost for the way I view a lot of things I report on.
You're clearly very busy. There's no lack of news in the world, and today's shooting is only one of many things that keep happening. It must be really difficult to be able to make the decision of what gets aired, what gets put on in the time that you have.
Yeah, there's a certain, because I'm not motivated by ideology in coverage, so in some ways it's not that difficult because things which are happening, my focus is what has happened today, or what is, what's in the news today, or what's an important story, and some of it is, tempered by where do we have correspondence, where are people, what stories do we have ready to go, what guests can we get? So some of the coverage is based on that, but for me it's not. For me, it's based on what's happened today, usually, often takes precedence. But if it's obviously an ongoing story, it's what the latest thing on that is, rather than, if you're ideologically motivated and you have a channel which is geared toward, spreading election lies, then your coverage can be based on, it doesn't need to be based on anything that's happened on that particular day. It can be just driving toward that, and that doesn't interest me.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had to really push for airtime of something?
Yeah, certainly. Look, it's always a discussion. I have an executive producer who I've worked with for 20-something years at CNN. He and I have been together in a lot of really dangerous places, and he's, puts up with me, and so I'm lucky to work with him, and so we know each other very well. But he and I have, it's an ongoing discussion all day long. We have a conference call in the morning. All throughout the day, we're figuring out, okay, everything we think we're going to do in the morning that we think will be on the evening show. I have a show that's on from 8 to 9. A lot of, 70% of that might not make it on by the time. And the show we have ready to go at 7:59 and 59 seconds, the second before we go on air, that can all be tossed out the moment we go on air and something else happens. So the story in Tennessee on the lawmakers, the 3 lawmakers who were voted, 2 of them were only expelled. That started breaking just 20 minutes or so before the 8 o'clock show began, and that was not what we had planned to do most of the show on, but we ended up, I think, doing the first 30 minutes just live. We had cameras in the hallway. We had interviews with one of the lawmakers just after he was voted out. We were following the vote as it was going on. We were able to pull in, interesting guests on it. So it's a combination of factors that kind of go into it.
So you're taking the day off today?
I am. Yes. Yes. It's a rare time that I take the day off. Yeah. They don't. Yes. It's sort of like in the Charlie Brown. Like when in the Charlie Brown spelling bee, when you spell a word wrong, it's like, and then they just go like, you just disappear. So nobody. I feel like if I disappear too long from the screen, that someone else will just replace me, who's much smarter and better. So.
So for one day, it's
one
okay.
day it's okay.
One day it's
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you won't have to disappear at 8 o'clock to go do your show.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. Let me see what time it is now. We got plenty of time. Yeah.
So I did.
I could honestly, worst case scenario, it's 4:42. If I needed to, I could do a show from here probably at 8 if I had to.
You could do it from dinner.
We could. Oh yeah. I'd probably have to go off to a side thing, but yeah, we've done shows in some weird areas.
Okay, we will keep that in mind.
Okay.
What's the biggest change for you as an anchor versus being out there traveling the world and?
The nice.
Yeah.
It's such a ridiculous term, anchor. I started out, as I said, just overseas. And so for the first, certainly 3 years, I was just, this person with a small camera. I started getting like one producer or two producers from Channel 1, and we would all travel together and we'd all shoot. But it didn't seem to be going anywhere. It wasn't like I wasn't planning like this is my pathway to finally getting that anchor job I've always dreamed of. To me, the vision of an anchor was like Kent Brockman on The Simpsons. So that I wasn't really aiming for that. And he is sort of an accurate representation of some folks. But then literally Newsweek, there used to be a magazine called Newsweek, that did an article about Channel 1, and they wrote about some of the stuff I had done, because it was like this weird kid who shows up in these places and he shoots these stories. And ABC read that and asked for a tape, and I thought they were kidding. I thought it was like a joke that somebody was calling. And anyway, I learned it wasn't. I put together a tape, and so they hired me as a correspondent, which was insane because I was 27, and in those days they didn't hire anybody in that age. But I never really wanted to, like, anchoring just seemed not like something I was particularly interested in. But I started anchoring on an overnight newscast. But the nice thing about CNN is they still want you out in the field. They still want you going to, anchoring just gives you a little bit more the ability to frankly choose where you go. So my day is much more determined by myself than it would be if I was a correspondent waking up every day, I might get sent someplace, and I knew one day I wanted to have kids and I wanted to be able to at least have some agency over my schedule. But it's nice because you can, your question earlier about can you argue about where, I can insist on going. I did a whole week in DRC Congo, which used to be Zaire, which I was obsessed with as a kid, and I'm still fascinated by DRC Congo. So I go there a lot, and I did a whole week of shows from there, which is not necessarily where a news network is probably going to want to send you for a week because it's very expensive and difficult to work there. But they knew it was an important story that I was wanting to do, and I was doing a story about sexual violence on Eastern Congo, and they supported me in it. So that you're able to get stuff on the air that you might otherwise not if you have if you're an anchor because you have your own show, you can kind of determine that.
So I think I'm starting to see a little bit of how you're able to write books because you're able to control your time a little bit more. In that sense.
I also, until I've had kids, I've had no life. So, like, I don't know, like, you may think, like, I've had some, like, glamorous fun. Like, this is all I've been doing. Like, I haven't been out there, like, enjoying myself. Like, in, my entire 20s, all my friends were, like, having dinners and going out to clubs and stuff. And I lost all my friends because I was always away. And I'd constantly cancel any, meetup or dinner or whatever I had because if something would happen and I would just be off. And so after a while, people were like, oh, why even call this guy? So it made it much easier for me I'm that friend. So it made it much easier to just focus on work. And so I've really, and I've loved it because the work has been the most exciting thing I could possibly imagine. Everything else pales in comparison. There's nothing more extraordinary in my mind than, something happens in the world and I can get on a plane and I can actually go to wherever. I can go to Ukraine, and within a 24-hour period, or however long it takes to get there, I can be in a tank moving toward a front line with Ukrainian soldiers, or I can be, and that's an extraordinary thing to be able to drop into other people's lives, and and it's not just visiting other people's lives; it's dropping in people's lives in the most intense, sometimes horrific, or exciting, or whatever it is, most important moment of their life, often, or often where their life is under threat, and to be able to tell their story and allowed to tell their story by them, and to kind of, be able to try to do justice to the sights and the sounds and the smells of it, and bring that, and send that, and package that, and write it in a way that is accurate. To me, there's just, why wouldn't I do that all the time? It's incredible. I cannot believe I get to do it.
So you describe that, and you've written a book that is more of a history work.
Yes.
Vanderbilt, which the research process can't be as exciting and glamorous as what you just described. I assume it's a lot of poring over.
Well,
That's more my world.
Well, as I said, this is the first book I co-wrote. So Catherine Howe, who is a great historian and writer, she did most of the legwork on it. So I cannot claim to have, I benefited from the arduous hours that she put in. But I certainly read extensively history books, and but for me, what was interesting about trying to write a history book, and particularly on the Vanderbilts, is, look, there have been Pulitzer Prize winning books about Commodore Vanderbilt, who was my great, three or four greats, grandfather, who was, not a nice person. I mean, he was, probably, he had a self-described mania for money. He very well could have been a psychopath. There are a lot more psychopaths out there than I think we all realize in the world of business and maybe media as well. But I wanted to me, what was interesting is not to try to write a linear history, because there's no way I would write something as good as has already been written out there, but was to kind of drop in moments in these historical figures' lives, and kind of see them as humans, and see them sort of how the money, the ripple effects of, you have this patriarch of a family who is obsessed with money and has a mania for money, and from the age of 11, and bills, by the year Commodore Vanderbilt died in 1877, one out of every $20 in circulation belonged to him. So, he died with $100 million, which today is not, you think, well, Bezos' boat cost $500 million. But $100 million back then, it was an extraordinary figure. He had more money than the US Treasury had. And his son doubled that fortune in 8 years, which is incredible. And what's even more incredible is that the third and fourth generation went on a spending spree, the likes of which you cannot believe. And unlike the Astors, who I'm writing a book about now, they didn't reinvest it in the land that became New York. They built these enormous palaces, and gave Vanderbilt Hall. They built these enormous palaces, that were torn down within 60 years because they were so bloated and needed, 60 servants to run them, and tax laws changed and inheritance taxes changed, and no one wanted to live in these houses, and they were sold off for scrap. And to me, that's fascinating, the arc of that. It's always interesting because, I come from this family, and for my entire life, everybody assumed that I was like the scion of the Vanderbilt family and would be inheriting great wealth from the Vanderbilts, like as if there was some sort of giant Vanderbilt slush fund that I was just about to be immersed in at the age of 21. And both my parents, my dad took me to see the Commodore Vanderbilt statue, which is outside Grand Central Station in New York, as he founded Grand Central Station. And he owned the 16 acres of Midtown Manhattan at the time. Don't know what happened to that. But my dad who grew up very poor in Mississippi on a farm, took me to see this statue when I was 12 or something, or maybe 10, and to explain to me that this is my great-great-great-grandfather. And the only thing I came away understanding is that all grandparents turned into statues when they died. So I must have been 6 actually at the time. But what he was showing me was to let me know that as I grew older, I would hear more about this family that my mom had belonged to, but that, to not buy into it, to not believe that there was some pot of gold waiting for me, because there wasn't. There was no trust fund, there was nothing like that. And I'm very lucky that was the case, because you look at the history of the Vanderbilts, all of whom inherited great fortunes. A lot of them didn't do much with their lives. They spent a lot of money. In fact, one of them said that inheriting money is I forgot his quote, but it's as bad as cocaine, because you think it's going to last forever, and he feels great, and you do nothing. And that's really, to me, sort of why I wanted to write this book for my kids, because I don't want them to feel like that there's some pot of gold waiting for them, because there's not.
So it's a giant cautionary tale.
It's a giant cautionary tale, yes. I think I'm fascinated by this whole, all these people who we all look to, people on the, not the People magazine, you look at people on the cover of People magazine and all these people we read about and look at on social media and we think, wow, it's incredible. I view them as like deeply warped and in need of serious help. Like, I'm fascinated that we all are like brought up to look at these people and think like, oh my God, if only. And like when you actually look at their lives, the misery of Commodore Vanderbilt, he sent his wife to an insane asylum so he could shtup the babysitter. It's true.
So I was going to say, with so many people that you could have chosen to, obviously, your statue ancestor has to be in the story because he's started the whole thing.
Yes.
But once you get past him, there's so many people you could have lingered on. So I'm curious if there were people that if you had more chapters, who would you have added back into the book?
I'm pretty.
You're good.
Yeah, I'm good. Like I enjoyed spending time with them, but at a certain point, like I didn't want to spend any more time with them. Like I'm writing this book about the Astors now, and there's a lot of dreadful Astors. They're just sort of dreadful, and after a while, you just don't want to spend any more time with them. They make the Vanderbilts seem, I don't know, more fun. Yeah.
Well, you describe the feud that went on between Caroline Astor and
Alva Vanderbilt.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, it's I don't know.
It puts the Jersey Shore Housewives show to
yes.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. There was this epic feud. There was this. It's too long and involved to go into. I can't even. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to talk about it off camera.
Okay.
So much there. But no, I'm really.
I can tell you're a historian because this.
I know.
Yes.
I was just like loving every single moment. You have such a beautiful way of. You and Catherine Howe have such a beautiful way of rendering the past, and so much of this history I'm very familiar with. But I really I felt like I was there at these crazy balls.
Yeah, it's nice because there was a lot of first-person accounts on with the Vanderbilts. With the Astors, actually not so much. So it's actually it's tricky. But yeah, the Astors actually destroyed their records pretty much every generation, which is interesting. Yeah. So.
Yep, and then poor Consuelo being locked into her room before her wedding.
Yeah.
All those things.
Right. Yeah. So Consuelo Vanderbilt was like married off to the Vanderbilts. They had money, but they didn't have entree to New York society. So back then, that was they had so much money that seemed important to them to like get into New York society. And one of the ways was to start marrying off people to British nobility, so they would get a British title, and all the British nobility were all like counts of no account, as my grandmother used to say, meaning they had the title but they had no money. So it was this perfect match of like nouveau riche, ridiculously wealthy, tacky New Yorkers marrying the Duke of Marlborough, and they get married and misery ensues for generations. It's true. They're all miserable. Yeah.
Yeah, they do not look happy.
No. They're miserable.
No.
Yeah.
Well, so when is the Astor book going to come out?
I think September.
Oh wow! So you're almost there.
Yeah. Yes, I'm doing edits right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll have you back when it's over.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. But you have another project that's going, and that's been really different. The podcast.
Yes, that's what the world needs, another podcast. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe not, but your podcast is really special.
My podcast is special.
Your podcast is special.
That is true. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. I had no interest in doing a podcast. I did not think the world needs another podcast, and yet here I am. I did a 8-episode podcast about grief and loss, and I found my mom died 3 years ago, and 2019, and it was almost 4 years ago. And while going through her stuff, which is this process everybody who has lost somebody goes through, I found it incredibly lonely and isolating. And in going through her stuff, my mom was like a very fancy hoarder. There was a lot of stuff. And it was also my father's stuff and my brother's stuff, because all of that had just been packed away and nobody had ever gone through it. So I'm the last surviving member of the little family that I was born into. And so I was, going through a storage room full of boxes, and it was like the storage room in, I don't know if you remember the closing scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there's like all just, the Ark is stored in this warehouse of boxes. And I like that nobody below the age of 25 is nodding their head, because they haven't even seen that movie. So I just found it incredibly isolating, and I started, I like this book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and one of the things Viktor Frankl writes about is, he's a psychologist who was in Auschwitz. He talks about narrating experiences in his head, horrible experiences in his head, as a way of going through them. And so he narrates them as he would sort of a professor narrating a clinical situation. And I found myself narrating as I'm going through all these boxes, as I would a correspondent. If I was like writing this story, I was sort of narrating in my head this stuff, and I just started recording it, and ended up putting this together with some interviews with some people who discuss loss and grief in ways that blew my mind. And one of them was Stephen Colbert, whose father and two younger brothers were killed in an Eastern Airlines plane crash when Stephen was 10 years old. And Stephen talks about grief in a way that I've never heard before. And I'd done a brief interview with him years ago about it, and so he's in the podcast. And it's all these people. It's Laurie Anderson, who's a really cool musician, Elizabeth Alexander, who was here at Yale. So it's just different ways of thinking about grief and loss, and I've been surprised at the response to it. It's been pretty extraordinary.
I think probably, especially in this moment in time when we're coming out of COVID, obviously, as you've said, death is something that we all go through, having to survive it, deal with the aftermath. But I think we're in a place, maybe in American society and the world, that has been dealing with so much death, and maybe your podcast is coming along at a time that we all need it to really find our way through it.
I don't know about that, but
I think so.
I wouldn't say we all need it. I mean, it's just a little podcast, but it's been. What's nice is that for me, it has made me feel less alone in this kind of bizarre world of grief. To realize that I'm on this road that everybody will be on at some point, and generations of people have been here before. We all, I remember, at Yale, and it's a perfect example. Anybody who's an undergraduate here, you all live in rooms of dead people. You all live in the rooms of generations of people who have been in those rooms before. And we all think, Robert Heinlein said, every generation thinks they invented sex, and every generation is wrong. We all think we're the first to have these experiences that we're having, and to be facing the issues we're facing. And as one ages, you start to realize, and it's an obvious thing, but there are, everybody, there's not anything you are going through in your life that has not already been gone through by generations of people before you. And I take great comfort in that. It literally helps me when I'm in a situation where I feel completely overwhelmed, and or my career is about to be ruined, or my life is about to be destroyed, or whatever it is, and realize somebody has been in this situation before, and there's a way out of it, and things will take their course, and grief is the same way. There's not any permutation of my grief that is original or different, and yet it feels that way to me, and I feel completely alone in it. But realizing all these people who have been here before us going through the same things. I follow on Instagram this site called the AIDS Memorial, and to me, it's the most incredible thing on Instagram. And it's just photographs of people who have died, put up by their loved ones with little stories about them. And I see myself in that page, every couple of days. I'm like, that's me, or that's my friend, Joe, or whatever it is. And it's just these generations of people who are no longer here, but who went through the exact same stuff. And I find great comfort in that. Maybe I'm just weird.
No. It's I will say that for people who are not quite prepared to be part of that conversation, it is quite an emotional experience. I will say, like, I clicked on it just to see what you were doing. And
No, it'll like stop you dead in your
It
tracks
will
and
stop
like
you dead in
make
your
you weep.
tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
but I like there's nothing wrong with that. Like
no,
for me,
I
like
think it's so needed.
Yeah.
Because I think we're so in this space of we just have to keep going. We don't have time.
Yeah.
But I think you're telling us we should make time. It's very important.
yeah.
Grief
and-
is not something to.
Yeah, look, I think, I wasn't able to talk about loss for my entire life. And my brother died right before senior year. And I mean, I was stunned and completely, senior year, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't apply for any jobs. I didn't, I graduated. I had no idea what was going to happen, what I was going to do. I think, I don't know. I certainly would have benefited from, I wish I had been able to talk about it. It's not that I didn't know I should. I certainly knew I should, but yeah, I didn't.
So maybe this is not the best place to end, but I do realize that.
We're really bringing it down here.
No, I'm hoping the students will bring us back up. We're in the portion, I'm just mindful of the
Sure,
time.
yeah.
We do need to get to our Q&A, and we did have 5 students who had submitted questions that we are, I think we have time for. So if the 5 students could sort of stand up and raise their hands so that our, excellent, you're all very close together, kind of. Mega is all the way out there.
This is really like the honor system. I thought like 20 other people would be like, oh yeah, I'm one of the...
This is what happens when you're in a college where the head of college knows who everybody is. Nobody's trying to fake it out. But yes, we can go in this direction. Megan, you want to be first? Go for it.
Hi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hey.
This feels like really unreal to just be able to talk to you.
Me too.
My name is Megha Joshi. I'm a senior in Timothy Dwight College. And I was wondering, how do you feel that large news networks such as CNN affect the polarization of America? And what do you do in your profession specifically to try and minimize it?
Yeah, look, I think we live in an incredibly polarized society. I think it's been polarized for a very long time. Certainly any reading of history shows that. And our media has also, if you look at, Alexander Hamilton started the New York Post in order to get his point across. I think it's difficult. I think it's certainly something I think about all the time. It's something I worry about all the time. And I know everybody in my orbit who I work with, it's of great concern as well. I try not to, I'm not interested in being a liberal newscast or a conservative newscast. I don't watch partisan newscasts like that. I'm not interested in what some overpaid anchor thinks about, what candidate they support or what policy they like. I don't want to, I'm not interested in that. I think our viewers, should make up their own minds about stuff. I believe in facts, and I believe in presenting people with facts and talking to people from different walks of life and different political positions and letting viewers make up their mind. I do think in an age where when people lie, I think it's the job of journalists to point that out that they are lying. That can also, at times, many people think they are doing that, and that can be very partisan in some ways. If you are seeing things through a certain ideological prism, and you are confronting people based on your prism, and you think you're doing it because it's true, and what they're saying is false, then that can be partisan. So I think these are all things you have to be constantly conscious of, and constantly concerned about bias, and bias in many different forms, not just political bias, but economic, the lens through which everybody sees things through a lens, and that lens is influenced by the geography of where you're from, the background you have, the political beliefs you have, whatever it is, there are many kinds of biases, and I think it's important to be aware of all of them. I don't, I do think we are living in an age where there's so much information, and when I was growing up, it was 3 broadcast news channels, and it was ABC, CBS, and NBC, and Walter Cronkite, and I don't know who else was on the other ones. Everyone watched Walter Cronkite, or Roger Mudd, I guess, for a while, was on NBC. And people now, a lot of people from my generation and older look back at that and think, oh, that was the golden age of news. Like, we trusted those people. Those people were good. We trusted them. But if you actually look back, like, the original newscasts were 18 minutes long. And so that's what people thought they were getting in 18 minutes. They thought they were getting everything they needed to know. That's the way it was Walter Cronkite's tagline. And I have great respect for him. I think he was an amazing person. But the newsrooms were all white. They were all male, all generally New York, Washington. There weren't people of color, gay people. I mean, it was a very small lens that you were seeing things through. And I think it's easy to look, for people of a certain generation, to look back on that and think, oh, that was a time of where you could really trust what you were seeing. I actually think, we're living in this extraordinary time of information where we all, have in this room on our phones access to more information than anybody in the, history of the world has ever had access to. And I think that's an amazing thing. I think it's also it's overwhelming. I think it contributes to this feeling of that the world is just getting worse and worse, and like things are so out of control. I actually think that the opposite is true. I think the world is better than it's ever been before. And I think if you look at the data, by just about every metric, your life is way better than anybody's ever lived on the planet. And your future, I mean, obviously there's tremendous, climate change, all sorts of things to be concerned about, but literacy rates, life expectancy, I mean, by just about every metric, life is better than it's ever been, and it's only getting better. So it's a long way of answering. I think it's a real issue. I try not to contribute to polarization. I try not to demonize people, as Jimmy was saying. I try not to fall into this sort of left-right thing. I try to, talk to people from different backgrounds and understand where they're coming from and present that to viewers. That's what I believe in.
Thank you. Okay, pop back up. Who was, I guess, Caitlin, you're next.
Hello,
Hi.
my name is Caitlin. I'm a sophomore in TD.
Cool.
And I was curious, so you've covered a lifetime of stories, but is there one story you feel that you covered that didn't receive the attention or the emotional reaction that it merited? And if so, how did this experience change your perspective on our media consumption?
Yeah, look, a lot of the stuff I'm interested in, people aren't interested in. So I get that, and that's okay. People have a lot going on in their lives, and so I don't want to. I will give you a specific example, but I don't want to sound like I'm pontificating, like, oh, if only people will listen to me talk about this, everything will be fine. People are busy; they have lives going on. I totally get that, and everybody has a right to think about what they feel is important and find that information out. And I'm glad we live in an age where we can find out whatever information you want to find out, you can find out. The things that interest me, I'm drawn to places that a lot of people don't pay attention to. I'm drawn to, Democratic Republic of Congo. I will come back to. I'm fascinated by that country. I'm fascinated, there's a tremendous, violence in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is something I'm very interested in. And some of the most extraordinary people I've ever talked to have been, I talked to a woman named Angela who was brutally assaulted in her village by government forces who came into the village. She was sexually assaulted by a number of people. They tried to get her brother involved in it. He resisted, so they slit his throat in front of her. They threw one of her children on a fire. Then after they left, her husband came back and kicked her out of the village because he was afraid she was HIV positive. And so when I met her, she was living in another village with her children. Her child who was thrown in the fire survived. And she was waking up every day and trying to find work. And she was living and surviving. And so that's somebody like I think about all the time. And yeah, I wish I could have done more for that person in her life to change her life, and also to tell her story in a way that more people would see and watch. But in all honesty, she didn't speak English, and that's difficult for some viewers, and it's a tough story, and it's easy to turn the channel on, and I totally understand that, and I get that. But for me, I think that's when it's weird to even bring those things up, but when you're trying to tell somebody's stories, these are all things you have to think about in terms of how you present the story, and what is the best way to get that person's story to an audience. And hopefully people see it and want to help the organization who was helping her, which is how I found her. And so, yeah, I think there's so many stories we don't pay attention to that I wish, there's a lot of organizations that I work with after doing stories on them because I think they're doing great work and I want to continue that work. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Hi, Anderson.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. My name's Arlene, and I'm a sophomore in TD. And my question is, as a television journalist, what has been the biggest challenge you have faced on CNN, and how did you navigate it in order to continue reporting to all the people watching you?
What's been the biggest challenge? I mean, there's a lot. There's personal, handling stress, things like that. But I guess more, look, I think certainly in the last administration, it was a challenging environment, and continues to be. But certainly the last administration was a challenging environment to be targeted by the President of the United States, to have the company I work for targeted by the President of the United States, and to, it's been an interesting thing to see the kind of techniques now being used by people in public life and political life to not answer questions or to just only speak to outlets that they feel represent their ideological slant. And I think as reporters, it's been, I've worked overseas in regimes where, where truth is not something that you get, how can I say this? Which are not truthful, and it's difficult, to figure out how to work in those environments, how to respond in a way that doesn't, it's easy to overreact and it's easier to kind of, I'll just say it was just a difficult time. To me, personally, that was the hardest thing, to not, because I don't want to express personal opinions. I'm not interested in being somebody who wears their opinion on their sleeve and tries to force it on viewers. I do believe in listening to other people and being prepared for interviews so that you can factually push back on somebody. But I don't argue with people over their politics. Good people can see things in different ways. And there can be some truth on both sides. But there are facts, and I try to stick to, if I'm in a contentious interview with somebody, I try to stick to facts and what is factually correct and what they've said that is not factually correct. To me, that's the ground I like to try to confront somebody on.
Hello, Mr. Cooper. Carlos, you kind of just answered a bit of my question, but I just wanted to ask, how do you separate your own feelings and opinions from all the things that you cover? And I know you just said you don't like to share your opinion, but do you think there's like value in putting your opinion out there and being honest with the public of what you think?
Right. So look, we live in an age where everybody is expressing their opinion, and I think that's great. I think it's great that I do think that there's a role, I don't think I'm best at, like, I don't believe in getting up every night and expressing my opinion on issues which affect people's lives that I may not understand how somebody with lived experience sees something or has experienced something. And so I'm not egotistical enough to believe that I'm egotistical, but I'm not egotistical enough to be on TV, but not enough to believe that I know everything or that I'm right. And so I very much view myself as learning just as our viewers are learning, and I'm generally asking questions that I'm actually interested in hearing the answers to. I'm not interviewing people who I know reflect a certain, echo chamber that they're going to give me a political answer that is going to please me so that my viewers will only be exposed to some, pleasing point of view. I believe in being honest in all things I do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to, announce ahead of time, everything I believe in. I think you can, if you're focused on facts, if you're focused in a world of what is true and what is not true, as opposed to shades of gray and opinion, for me, that's where I frankly, I think there's not enough people doing that, and so that is where I choose to focus on, and yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Hi, Anderson. Thank
Hey.
you. I'm Quinn. I'm a freshman in TD. In the past 5 years, there's been a pretty sharp increase in the amount of misinformation and false news that's circulated on the internet and other sources. And this has led to a pretty large social shift in terms of how the American public views news organizations, with a large portion of the population solely viewing those outlets that align with their opinions and decrying others as fake news. And with this in mind, how can news organizations and journalists individually work to combat this problem and reinstill trust in the news?
Look, I think I'll speak for myself. I think it's important to do the best you can and to not be a jerk and to not get things wrong and to not give in to your biases and to not, to think about all these things and to spend a lot of time worrying about it and thinking about it. And, I know I do, and I know the people around me do. I can't speak, I don't know about some of these other folks and other, channels and stuff. It's fascinating to see the Dominion lawsuit that's going forward. I don't know how closely you've been following this, but to see sort of the text exchanges between other anchors and another network, concerned about the stock price of the parent company. I don't know what my parent company, I'm not even sure who my parent company is these days, but I don't know what the stock price is. It would never even occur to me to, why would I care? And I'm sure my corporate overlords, whoever they are, would probably not like that, but that's just not my job. And so that was sort of, I'm not going to say surprised me, because I know the people involved, and that doesn't surprise me. But I think it's important that you have personal standards and personal things that you personally, what is right and what is wrong and what your job is. I know what my job is. My job is not to pontificate every night about, what I think, and that's not why I'm there. I'm there because I've spent a lifetime of telling other people's stories and going to places and seeing things and wanting to bring viewers to those places so that they can walk in somebody else's shoes. And so that's the only thing I add to this conversation, add to the table. There's a lot of people who do that other stuff really, really well. If you want like really smart liberal people doing that, and if you want really smart conservative people doing that, they're out there and they have networks that are doing really well. It's just not what I'm just not that way personally, and it's not just doesn't interest me. So my interest is, in just trying to understand what is going on and trying to do it in a way that's human and not left or right, but sort of center, I guess. And it's not, it doesn't necessarily fit with the times sometimes, but to me, that's what I can do to try to help on the polarization, to try to help on bias and misinformation. It's important that like facts actually matter, and there are things which are true and there are things which are not true, and we can actually go and see the things which are true, and we can tell you about the things that are true, and we can show you the things that are not true. I've interviewed people who believe I drink the blood of children and am secretly a lizard. And, the former president of the United States is catering to those people. Like, that they're all still out there. And, I mean, they literally believe I drink the blood of children. And, I'm not, I don't know what to do with that, So, yeah, we live in a time. It's interesting to me that the more information we have access to, the more this has bubbled up and the more this disinformation has spread. People can find out what is true. There's people who believe that Joe Biden is a sock puppet. It's the same people who believe I'm a lizard person. So, I feel like I can do what I can do, and I just don't. It's easy to get sucked into all that other stuff because there's a market incentive clearly for these other networks to do that, but it's just not something that I personally am interested in, or believe in.
So we're not going to leave it there, because
Okay.
that would not be okay.
Okay.
So why don't we end by asking, what are your future projects? So you have the Astor book that's going to finish out, and what else?
Are you saying I need another project? Is this you're adding to my stress here?
Okay, let me help you
So
out.
no, so look, so I work, I do CNN, I do 10 stories a year for 60 Minutes, and to me 60 Minutes is sort of, it's a show I've grown up watching, and I guess I'm doing another season of the podcast, and I don't know, I sound like I'm pitching products. I don't know, I do stuff. I don't really know where my career is going. I don't know what comes down the pike, but what I like is being able to just to work in all these different realms, and thankfully I'm in a place where, I can do the show on CNN, I can do 60 Minutes, and I can, I was just in Cambodia for 60 Minutes for a week on a project, an investigative project I'm working on. I just interviewed Rick Rubin, this really interesting music producer who's, just about every artist has worked with him. So I like dropping in on people's very different than I would cover on CNN, but it's interesting to, talk to creative people and, work with them.
On those lines, am I correct that the Vanderbilt book is going to be becoming a television miniseries or something?
I did. Wow, you've done your research. There were. It's. I guess Amazon has picked it up for to at least see a pilot for a possible dramatic series on it. Yeah, we'll see.
So it will be better than the one that you critiqued in your book with Angela Lansbury.
Oh, yeah. So when I was a kid, so my mom was involved with this custody battle when she was 10 years old. She was taken away. It was at the height of the Depression. My mom it's so weird and complicated to even go into. But basically, my mom's mom and my mom's great aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who created the Whitney Museum, they sued for custody over my 10-year-old mother. Neither of them really knew my mom, including her own mother, but they both sued for custody, and it was called at the time the trial of the century. It was these, two well-known women fighting for custody of this very rich 10-year-old girl they called Little Gloria, and the country was divided on it. Hundreds of people would show up at the court every day. It went on for months. it was, my mom ultimately was taken away from her own mother, sent to live with Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney because she was the rich one, and my mother was raised by this aunt who she didn't even know. And how do we even get on this topic?
Because it's going to become a dramatized TV series.
Yeah, but I don't know why I brought up that. Oh, no, you brought up the Angela Lansbury thing. Anyway,
yes.
My mom never talked about this experience she had as a kid when I was a kid, so I didn't really know anything about it. And then one day, some lady wrote a book about the custody battle, Barbara Goldsmith, and it became a made-for-TV miniseries with Angela Lansbury. And my mom went ballistic because my mom had never talked about this, and it was like deeply personal to her, and all of a sudden it's a made-for-TV movie. So it was really fun the week that TV series was on to be in my house because my mom was very upset. So yes, and it's terrible. I never saw it until I wrote the Vanderbilt book, and I finally saw it, and yeah, it's really awful.
You're very funny.
It's an amazing story, but it was done very badly. But yeah. So anyway.
And it will be much, much better than that.
It will be much, much better than that. How many of you are undergraduates here? Wow.
Wow.
And are you excited? Are you optimistic about the world? Yes?
Yeah.
I love, you said that, you did that the most sarcastically of anybody I've ever, you were like, yeah, uh-huh. That's such a Yale thing, like, yeah, you're optimistic, but yeah, just sarcastically, so. So I get it.
Some things don't change, is
Some
what you're
things don't
saying.
change, yeah, well. Yeah, I just think, I just remember being at Yale and being like scared of what was to come and, wishing I had a plan and wishing things were clearer. And now, and all the things that I cared about at Yale at the time, I didn't really care so much about classes. I was a coxswain on a crew team. I thought that, to me, I was obsessed with it. Looking back, I'm like, I don't know why I was so obsessed with that. But I was, and all the things now that I look back fondly on are not the things I thought I would remember and the things that I thought I would care about. All the things now, it's like little moments that I experience with friends and people on the team, and just these little moments that were meaningless at the time. But those are the things, like I was on this crew team, and I don't remember how we did. We did very well, I've been told. But like, I don't remember the races. I don't remember where we were in the national, championships and stuff like that. But I remember like riding on the bus out to the boathouse. I remember the creak on the stairs in the boathouse. Just these little things. I remember, hanging out in Durfee with my, all my other loser roommates and me, and all that stuff has taken on a much greater import than when I was actually going through it. And so I guess I would just say, especially the person who's a freshman, is just to enjoy the experience you're having. And because what you're going to remember of it is so different than what you think you're going to remember of it. And you're going to hear and it won't have any reality for you until you're an old person like me and coming back and you'll be like, oh, I don't remember this, but I remember the ice cream at Durfee Hall or whatever it was. So anyway, that's it.
All right.
That's all I got.
All right. Please join me in thanking Anderson Cooper.